The mist clung to the cliffs of Willow Creek, like a whispered secret, softening the jagged edges of the Oregon coast where the town's high school stood, its auditorium a faded relic of brighter days, with peeling paint and creaky seats that groaned under the weight of restless teenagers. Clara Evans, 14, slipped through the crowded hallways of Willow Creek High, her head bowed, her dark braid swinging against her worn sweater, the kind of girl who moved like a shadow, unnoticed by most but seen too sharply by those who sought her out for cruelty. She lived with her Aunt Mara in a cramped apartment above the town's only laundromat, where the hum of machines and the scent of cheap detergent seeped into everything, even her dreams. Clara's mother had died 3 years ago, leaving behind a guitar she never played and a notebook of half-finished songs, and her father, a man whose temper burned hotter than his love, had vanished long before that. At school, Clara hummed to herself during lunch breaks, soft melodies under her breath to drown out the loneliness, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the chaos of the cafeteria. She thought no one noticed, but someone always did. A group of classmates, led by a sharp-tongued girl named Becca, had caught her humming behind the bleachers one day, recording it on a phone, their laughter slicing through the air like broken glass. They'd signed Clara up for the spring talent show, as a prank, slipping her name onto the list with mocking glee, knowing she'd never choose the spotlight herself. That afternoon, as the final bell rang and students spilled out into the salty air, Clara hurried toward the school's back exit, her sneakers scuffing against the gravel lot. She was almost to the gate when Becca's voice cut through the noise. Dripping with fake sweetness, "Clara, where's our superstar going?" The words pinned her in place, her stomach knotting as she turned to see Becca and 3 boys lounging by the bleachers, their smirks sharp as knives. "Heard you're singing at the talent show," one boy taunted, waving a crumpled flyer with her name in bold print. Clara's throat tightened, her fingers clutching the straps of her backpack, the realization hitting her like a wave. She hadn't signed up, but they had, turning her private humming into a public joke. "Give us a preview, Songbird," Becca said, pulling out her phone to record, her eyes glinting with malice. Clara shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to." The boys stepped closer, one nudging her shoulder, just hard enough to make her stumble, her heart pounding as she scanned the empty lot for help, finding none. "Sing or we'll make you," Becca snapped, her phone's red light blinking like an accusation. Just then, the low rumble of a pickup truck broke the tension, its tires crunching gravel as it pulled into the lot. Jack Harper, a carpenter, in his mid-40s with weathered hands and tired eyes, stepped out, his flannel shirt catching the wind. He'd been picking up lumber from the hardware store nearby when he saw the huddle, Clara's rigid posture screaming fear, like a deer cornered by wolves. Without a word, he crossed the lot, his boots heavy on the ground, his presence calm, but unyielding. "That's enough," he said, his voice low, cutting through the taunts like a blade. The group froze, startled by the tall man with graying hair and a gaze that didn't waver. "We were just messing around," one boy muttered. But Jack raised his phone, the camera lens steady. "I've got your faces, and I know your names," he said. "Want this sent to your parents or the principal? Your choice." The boys scattered, their bravado crumbling, and Becca hesitated, her expression flickering with something softer, shame perhaps, before she turned and ran. Clara stood frozen, her breath shallow, as Jack knelt to pick up her dropped pencil case, its contents scattered in the dirt. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, handing it back. She nodded, then shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. Jack glanced at his truck, then back at her. "Come on, let me give you a ride home." In the truck, the silence was heavy but not oppressive, the hum of the engine blending with the distant crash of waves. Clara stared at her hands, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, unsure why this stranger had stepped in. Jack didn't push her to talk, just drove past the laundromat to her apartment, the neon sign flickering in the dusk. As she reached for the door, she whispered, "Why did you help me?" Jack paused, his hands tightening on the wheel, thinking of his son Ethan, who used to strum a guitar in their backyard, his laughter brighter than the sun before a car accident stole him, away 2 years ago. Because someone should, he said simply, his voice carrying a weight Clara didn't yet understand. She stepped out, her sneakers crunching on the pavement, and as the truck pulled away, she felt something shift inside her, a tiny spark, of something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility of being seen not as a target, but as someone who mattered. Clara climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment above the laundromat, the hum of machines below vibrating through the walls, a constant reminder of the life she and her Aunt Mara scraped together in Willow Creek. But tonight, her steps felt lighter, as if Jack Harper's quiet intervention had loosened something tight in her chest. The apartment smelled of burnt toast and lavender air freshener, Mara's attempt to mask the dampness that clung to the walls, and Clara found her aunt at the kitchen table, her thin hands wrapped around a chipped mug, her eyes distant with the weight of years spent raising a niece she hadn't planned for. Clara dropped her backpack by the door, the memory of Jack's calm voice lingering like a melody she couldn't shake, and when Mara asked about her day, Clara hesitated, then mumbled about a kind man who stopped some kids from bothering her, her words careful, as if testing the air. Mara's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp with worry. What kind of man helps a girl he doesn't know? But Clara, for the first time, pushed back, saying, "He listened, Aunt Mara, not like other people," her tone soft but firm, surprising them both. The next day, Clara walked past Jack's workshop on her way home, a weathered shed behind a modest house on the edge of town, its windows glowing faintly against the coastal mist, and though she didn't plan to stop, her feet slowed, drawn, by the sight of an old acoustic guitar leaning against a workbench, cluttered with half-finished chairs and cedar planks. Jack was inside, sanding a table leg, his flannel sleeves rolled up, his face etched with lines that spoke of grief he didn't wear loudly. And when he saw her lingering by the gate, he waved her in, offering a chipped mug of chamomile tea without asking if she wanted it. The shed smelled of sawdust and varnish, a warmth that felt safer than the cold fluorescence of school, and Jack didn't press her to talk, just pointed to a stool and said, "Sit if you want," his voice steady, like he'd been expecting. "Huh?" Clara sat, her fingers tracing the mug's handle, and after a long silence she admitted she hummed to herself, because it was how her mother used to sing her to sleep, a habit that kept the loneliness at bay, even if it made her a target at school. Jack nodded, his eyes softening, and shared that his son Ethan, gone 2 years now, had loved music too, strumming chords in their backyard, dreaming of a stage he'd never reach. He picked up the guitar, its strings worn but true, and played. A single chord low and warm, then looked at Clara. "Want to try humming to that?" Her heart raced, fear and longing tangling together, but something in Jack's gaze, calm, unjudging, made her nod, and she let out a tentative hum, her voice raw, unpolished, but carrying a depth that made Jack pause, his fingers still on the strings. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, a sound that seemed to pull at the edges of his own grief, reminding him of Ethan's laughter woven into every note he'd once played. Clara stopped abruptly, her cheeks flushing. "I'm not good at this," she whispered. But Jack shook his head. "That was real, Clara, and real's worth more than good." They sat there, the guitar between them, and for the first time, Clara felt a space where her voice didn't have to hide, where it could simply be. Jack offered to drive her home again, and in the truck she clutched her notebook, pages filled with half-formed lyrics she'd never shown anyone, her mother's old songs mixed with her own, scribbled in moments of quiet defiance. When they reached the laundromat, Mara was waiting at the door, her arms crossed, her face a mix of suspicion and exhaustion, and she questioned Jack directly. "Why are you spending time with my niece?" Jack answered plainly, "She's got a voice and no one's listening. I'm just giving her a place to be heard." Mara studied him, her eyes searching for deceit, but found none, and though she didn't soften, she let Clara go back the E. Next day, a silent acknowledgement of the spark she saw in her niece's eyes. At school, the talent show loomed closer, its flyers plastered across the halls, Clara's name a taunting beacon for her classmates' whispers, some betting she'd freeze, others hoping she'd crash spectacularly, their words stinging but not breaking her as they once might have. In Jack's shed she found refuge, returning each afternoon to hum, then sing, her voice growing bolder with every note, Jack guiding her not as a teacher, but as a partner, letting her find the melodies, shape on her own. One evening, he pulled out an old cassette recorder, its buttons worn from years of use, and played back their session, Clara's voice filling the shed, fragile but fierce, like the tide carving paths through stone. She stared at the recorder, stunned to hear herself, and Jack said, "That's you, Clara, that's what the world needs to hear." She didn't believe him, not fully, but the tape was proof, a tangible piece of her that wasn't invisible. As she left that night, Jack handed her a blank cassette. "For your songs," he said, and Clara tucked it into her pocket, next to her mother's notebook, feeling the weight of possibility settle beside her fear. The shed, once just a carpenter's workspace, was becoming something else, a haven where two broken people could rebuild, note by note, and though the talent show still terrified her, Clara began to wonder if her voice, so long silenced, might finally find its place. Clara's sneakers crunched on the gravel path to Jack's workshop, the Willow Creek mist curling around her like a hesitant embrace, her mother's old notebook tucked tightly under her arm as she pushed open the shed door, the familiar scent of sawdust and cedar welcoming her like a second home. The talent show was 2 weeks away, and though her name on the school's flyer still felt like a trap set by Becca and her crew, the daily afternoons with Jack were weaving a quiet courage into her, each note she sang in the shed a step away. From the girl who hid behind her braid, Jack was already there, tuning his acoustic guitar, its worn body catching the soft glow of a single bulb overhead, and he greeted her with a nod. "Ready to make something today?" Clara set her notebook on the workbench, its pages frayed from years of her mother's dreams and her own tentative additions, and said, "I want to write a song, something mine, for the show." Jack's eyes lit up, not with surprise, but with pride, and he pulled a stool closer. "Let's find it then. What's it about?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tracing the notebook's cover, then spoke softly. "The ocean, my mum used to say, it never forgets where it's been. It just keeps coming back. I want it to feel like that." They began crafting Tide's Return, Clara humming fragments of melody, while Jack strummed chords, his fingers coaxing the guitar into a rhythm that echoed the push and pull of waves, never rushing her, letting her words, raw, unpolished, but achingly true, shape the song. Her voice, once a whisper meant only for herself, grew bolder, filling the shed with a texture that made Jack pause, his hands still as he listened, hearing echoes of his son Ethan's unfulfilled dreams in her notes, a bittersweet ache that urged him to keep going. At school, the taunts continued, Becca's voice slicing through the cafeteria with snide remarks about Clara's big performance, her followers snickering as they mimicked her humming, but Clara no longer shrank, her eyes meeting theirs with a quiet defiance, her afternoons with Jack a shield against their cruelty. One day she brought a verse to the shed, scribbled in pencil. "I'm not the wave that broke apart, I'm the tide that finds its heart." And when she sang it, Jack nodded. "That's you, Clara. That's the truth of it." He taught her. Basic guitar chords, his calloused fingers guiding hers over the strings, not to perform but to feel the music in her bones. And she practiced until her fingertips ached, each strum a small victory over her fear. Jack started recording their sessions on his old cassette player, the hiss of the tape a soft backdrop to Clara's voice, and one evening he played back a take, her melody rising clear and strong, making her eyes widen. "Is that really me?" Jack smiled. "It's always been you, just waiting to be heard." But the world outside the shed wasn't as kind, and the school counselor, Miss Vernon, called Clara to her office, her voice laced with concern. "We're worried about the talent show, Clara. Given your background, the pressure might be too much." Clara's stomach twisted, the familiar weight of being underestimated settling in, but she thought of Jack's shed, the guitar, the song taking shape, and said, "I'm not fragile, Miss Vernon, I'm just quiet, let me try." The counselor frowned, unconvinced, and later called Jack, suggesting Clara withdraw to avoid emotional strain, but Jack's voice was firm. "She's ready, not because she's fearless, but because she's choosing to be brave." The next day, Clara asked to meet Miss Vernon again, Jack by her side, his presence steady as she handed over a folded paper with her lyrics. "Read this. Do you see anything weak in it? The counselor skimmed the words, her expression softening, and though she didn't agree outright, she relented. You can stay on the list, but we'll be watching. Clara left the office, her heart pounding but her spine straighter. Jack's quiet nod a silent vow to stand with her. Back in the shed, they worked line by line, note by note, Clara's voice finding strength in the verses, wavering only when she pushed too hard, Jack guiding her back with a gentle chord, never correcting but showing, like leading a lost bird, to its nest. He shared stories of Ethan, how he dreamed of a community music program for kids like Clara, kids who felt invisible, and Clara began to see her song as more than a performance. It was a way to honor her mother's unfinished melodies and Ethan's unfulfilled vision. One afternoon she arrived with a new line. The tide doesn't ask for permission, it just comes home. And Jack's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something close. That's it, Clara. That's the heart of it. They recorded Fiat, the cassette spinning, capturing her voice as it grew. Not polished but real, carrying the weight of her losses and the hope of her becoming. Clara's Aunt Mara noticed the change, her niece's steps lighter, her eyes brighter. And though she still worried, she said, "You're different these days, like you're carrying something good." And Clara smiled. "I think I am." As the talent show neared, the shed became a sanctuary, its walls holding their music, their grief, their quiet triumphs, and Clara began to believe she could face the stage, not to prove anything to Becca or the school, but to claim the voice she'd hidden for so long. The night before the Willow Creek High Talent Show, the coastal mist thickened, blanketing the town in a hush that felt like the world was holding its breath, and Clara sat in Jack's workshop, her mother's notebook open on her lap, the lyrics of Tide's Return staring back at her, each word a fragile bridge between her fear and her courage. The shed was warm with the glow of a single lamp, its light catching the edges of Jack's old guitar and the half-finished furniture stacked in the corners. But Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the notebook, her voice barely above a whisper as she admitted, "I'm scared, Jack. What if I freeze up there? What if they laugh?" Jack set down the guitar he'd been tuning, his eyes steady, carrying the weight of his own losses. His son Ethan, gone too soon, whose dreams of music still echoed in this shed. And he said, "You're not singing for them, Clara. You're singing for the part of you that's been quiet too long." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather pouch, handing it to her. This was Ethan's. He wore it when he played, said it reminded him to keep going, like the waves never stop. Clara opened it, finding a silver pendant shaped like a wave, its edges worn but polished, and her throat tightened. "I can't take this." But Jack shook his head. "You can and you will. It's not about replacing him. It's about carrying something forward." She slipped the pendant around her neck, its weight grounding her, and they ran through Tide's Return one more time, her voice rising clear and strong, the melody weaving her mother's love for the ocean with her own quiet resolve, Jack's guitar a steady pulse beneath it, like the tide itself. Clara's fear didn't vanish, but it softened, her notes no longer tentative but claiming the space, and when they finished, Jack leaned back. "That's the song, Clara. That's what you'll give them tomorrow." At school, the whispers had grown louder, Becca and her crew spreading bets about Clara's inevitable failure. Their words sharp but less piercing now, as if Clara's time in the shed had built a quiet armor around her heart. That evening, Miss Riley, a local teacher who'd known Ethan and once taught Jack's music class years ago, stopped by the workshop, her auburn hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes warm as she watched Clara strum a chord. "You're doing something special here, Jack, and you, Clara, you're braver than you know." She shared a memory of Ethan, how he'd talked of building a music program for kids who felt left out, and Clara felt a spark, realizing her song could be part of that dream, not just hers, but something bigger. Ms. Riley's presence stirred something in Jack, a flicker of connection he hadn't allowed himself since Ethan's death, but he pushed it aside, focusing on Clara, who was now humming the chorus, her voice a thread of light in the dim shed. Back home, Clara's Aunt Mara noticed the pendant, her eyes softening as she touched it. "Your mum would have loved to see you like this, standing up for yourself." And Clara nodded, her chest tight with a mix of grief and hope. "I'm doing it for her. And for me." The next morning, Clara woke to a knot in her stomach. The talent show hours away, and she traced the pendant's wave with her finger, whispering the lyrics to steady herself. I'm not the wave that broke apart. I'm the tide that finds its heart. At the shed, Jack suggested one last practice, but Clara shook her head. I know it now, I just need to believe it. And Jack nodded. You will. When you're up there, you'll feel it. He shared his own fear, admitting he hadn't played publicly since Ethan's last school recital. The memory of that night a blade in his chest. But looking at Clara, he said, This isn't about performing, it's about showing up for you, for Ethan, for what's true. Clara's eyes met his and she asked, Will you play with me on stage? Jack hesitated, the thought of a public stage stirring old pain, but her trust pulled him forward. All right, I'll be there, right? Behind you. They spent the afternoon refining the song's bridge, Clara adding a line, The tide doesn't ask for permission, it just comes home. And when she sang it, Jack turned away to hide the glint in his eyes, pretending to adjust a string, the words echoing Ethan's stubborn spirit. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the shed's windows, Clara felt the pendant against her chest, its weight a reminder of Jack's belief, Ethan's legacy, and her mother's songs, all woven into the melody she'd carried to the stage. Jack packed the guitar, his hands steady but his heart racing. Knowing this was more than a performance, it was a step toward healing, for Clara and for him, a chance to let music be more than a memory of loss. Clara left the shed with her notebook. Clutched tight, the lyrics no longer just words but a promise to herself. And as she walked home through the mist, the ocean's distant roar seemed to hum along with her, urging her forward. In the quiet of the shed after she left, Jack sat at the workbench, the cassette recorder blinking, capturing their final rehearsal, and he labeled it Clara Tide's Return, Day 14, slipping it into a wooden box beside Ethan's old tapes, a small act of keeping them both close. The Willow Creek High Auditorium buzzed with restless energy as the spring talent show began. The coastal town's residents filling the creaky seats, their murmurs blending with the hum of anticipation, while Clara stood backstage, her hands clenched around the pendant shaped like a wave, its cool silver grounding her against the storm in her chest. The stage lights cast harsh beams through the worn red curtain, and Clara's denim jacket felt too thin to shield her from the eyes she knew would be watching, some with pity, others with the cruel hope of seeing her fail. But Jack knelt beside her, tuning the school's old grand piano, his flannel shirt rolled up, his presence steady as he whispered, You're ready, Clara. Just let the song do the talking. Her stomach churned, the memory of Becca's taunts and the school counselor's doubts looping in her mind. But she touched the pendant, Ethan's pendant, and nodded, her breath shaky, but her resolve firm, knowing this moment was for her, mother, for Jack, for the girl she was becoming. The program unfolded slowly with off-key solos, a clumsy dance routine, and a boy's shaky poetry reading, the audience clapping politely. But the air grew heavier when Clara's name was called. Slot 9, Clara Evans' Tide's Return original song. Jack stepped out first, his guitar slung over his shoulder, and the crowd quieted, sensing something different in his weathered calm. Then Clara followed, her boots clicking on the wooden stage, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would drown her voice. She gripped the microphone stand, its cold metal anchoring her, and glanced at Jack, who gave a single nod, his fingers strumming the opening chord, a low, rolling sound, like the tide creeping in. Clara's voice came soft at first, barely more than a breath. I'm not the wave that broke apart, I'm the tide that finds its heart. And the room stilled, parents pausing mid-text, students leaning forward, even Becca and her crew falling. Silent, their smirks fading as Clara's melody unfurled clear and raw, carrying the ache of her losses and the strength of her survival. Jack's guitar wove beneath her, steady and warm, each note a thread tying her to Ethan's memory, to her mother's songs, to the shed where she'd learned to trust her voice. And as the chorus rose, the tide doesn't ask for permission. It just comes home. Clara's eyes lifted past the lights, past the faces, singing not for approval but for truth. The bridge came, her voice swelling with quiet conviction. I'm not the shore that stays behind, I'm the wave that learns to climb. And the audience was no longer a crowd, but a collective breath, held in reverence for a girl who'd turned her pain into something unshakable. Jack played with a gentleness that belied his grief, his chords honoring Ethan's dream, and when Clara reached the final note, her voice lingered, soft but sure, like a wave settling into sand. The auditorium didn't erupt. It froze, the silence thick with awe. Then an old woman in the front row stood, her hands clasped, followed by a teacher. Then the whole room rose, not in a roar, but in a quiet, profound ovation, some wiping tears, others nodding as if they'd seen something sacred. Clara's eyes found her Aunt Mara in the crowd, her face wet with pride, clapping with hands that had rarely known joy, and Clara's chest swelled, not with triumph, but with the weight of being seen, not as the quiet girl, but as a voice that mattered. Backstage, she collapsed onto a folding chair, her hands trembling, the pendant warm against her skin, and Jack crouched beside her. "You didn't just sing, Clara, you spoke," his voice thick with emotion. She whispered, "I didn't forget." The words, and he smiled, "I knew you wouldn't." Miss Vernon, the counselor, approached, her earlier doubts replaced by a quiet apology. "I was wrong about you, Clara. You were ready." And Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, her heart still racing from the stage. In the crowd, Becca lingered, her face unreadable, not joining her friend's chatter, her eyes flickering with something like regret before she slipped away. And Clara noticed but let it go, her focus on the moment, on the song that had carried her through. Jack led her outside to the cool night air, the ocean's distant roar a soft echo of her melody, and they stood by his truck, the stars piercing the mist above. "You gave them something real," Jack said, and Clara looked at him. "It wasn't just me, it was us, you and Ethan too." Jack's throat tightened, the memory of his son's guitar blending with Clara's voice, and he nodded. "You finished something he started." Back in the shed that night, Clara opened Jack's wooden box, its cedar worn smooth by time, and placed the new cassette inside, labeled Clara, Tide's Return, Live, next to Ethan's tapes, a quiet act of joining their stories. She looked at Jack. "Do you think he'd be okay with me using his pendant?" And Jack's voice was soft. "He'd be proud you gave it a voice." The shed felt different now, no longer just a refuge, but a place where music had stitched their wounds, and as Clara left, she hugged Jack, her arms quick but fierce, whispering, "Thank you for listening." Jack stood alone after she was gone, the cassette player silent, the pendant's absence around his neck a reminder of what he'd given, and he felt a lightness he hadn't known since Ethan's laugh filled this space, a peace born not from forgetting, but from carrying forward. The morning after the talent show, Willow Creek stirred under a gentle drizzle, the kind that softened the town's rugged cliffs and made the ocean's murmur feel like a lullaby, and Clara walked to Jack's workshop with a newfound ease, her denim jacket bearing Ethan's wave pendant, her mother's notebook now brimming with her own lyrics, a living testament to the voice she'd claimed on stage. The performance of Tide's Return had sent ripples through the town, the local paper printing a modest headline, "High school freshman stuns with original song," and the whispers about Clara shifted from mockery to awe, even silencing Becca's crew, who now hesitated to meet her eyes in the school halls. At school, Principal Harmon summoned Clara, her smile genuine as she announced a regional youth arts festival. "We're nominating you, Clara, if you're willing." And Clara, her heart quickening but her voice steady, nodded. "I'd like that." In Jack's shed, she shared the news and he handed her a fountain pen. "The good one for big songs," he said with a grin, and instead of revisiting Tide's Return, Clara pulled out a blank page. "I want to write something new for kids like I was, who think they're invisible." They began shaping Shoreline Echoes, a song for the festival, its lyrics simple yet piercing. "You don't need to shine to matter, you don't need to scream to speak." And Jack's guitar wove a gentle pulse beneath her voice, his eyes bright with pride as Clara sang with a confidence that grew surer each day. The shed, once a quiet refuge, had transformed into a haven of creation, its corkboard blooming with Clara's lyrics, lines like, "My heart's not broken, it's learning to sing," pinned carefully, while Jack added a shelf for her cassettes, placing them beside Ethan's in the cedar box, a shared legacy of music and memory. Mara, Clara's aunt, saw the change. Her niece's shoulders no longer hunched, her gaze no longer fleeing to the floor. And one evening, she handed Clara an old cassette of her mother's singing, "Found this in storage. Thought it belongs. With you." And as Clara listened, tears fell, not from loss but from a connection that felt alive, her mother's voice echoing in her own. Miss Riley, the teacher who'd known Ethan, became a frequent visitor, her warmth softening the shed's edges, and one afternoon, as she and Jack sorted sheet music, their hands brushed, a fleeting moment of possibility that made Clara tease, "You stand straighter when she's around," earning a chuckle from Jack, a smart kid. The regional festival arrived at a modest community centre 2 towns over, its auditorium filled with folding chairs and a piano slightly off-key. But Clara took the stage, the pendant gleaming, and sang "Shoreline Echoes," her voice steady, not seeking applause but offering hope. And when a girl in the audience wept, not from sadness but understanding, Clara knew she'd touched a heart. The applause was warm, sincere, settling into her like a deep breath, and backstage, Jack hugged her. You gave them a reason to listen. Soon after, a middle school invited Clara to speak, and she stood before 30 students, her hands trembling but her voice clear. "I thought I had no voice, but someone listened, and that changed everything." And when a boy asked what helped most, she glanced at Jack in the back. "Someone who didn't try to fix me, just let me be heard." That evening in the shed, Clara played a new melody, her fingers sure on the guitar, and Jack noted, "You've changed, you stand taller," to which she grinned, "Not just the boots." The town rallied around Ethan's dream, sparked by Clara's song, and a music outreach program took shape, funded by a benefit concert where Clara closed with a quiet piece that drew the crowd closer, stitch by stitch, and Jack, for the first time since Ethan's death, played a solo, a melody born from presence, not pain, its notes a promise of new beginnings. After the concert, Clara placed a cassette, "Shoreline Echoes Live," in the cedar box, adding a note, "Thank you, Jack, for letting my voice be enough." And Jack, reading it later, whispered to the empty shed, "You finished it, Ethan." She did. Spring came late, green shoots piercing the soil outside the shed, now dubbed the listening room by the community, a space where kids gathered to share songs, some hesitant, some bold, but all heard. At a gathering, Clara handed Jack a booklet, "The Note That Changed My Life," her songs printed for the school's music program, dedicated to him, for Jack, who didn't rescue me, but reminded me I was worth hearing. And as they sat, among soft lights, pie on the table, and students strumming guitars, Jack felt a warmth that didn't erase Ethan's loss, but cradled it in something new: love, music, and a girl who'd become family. Clara played a final song, her voice a thread of light, and as it faded, the room held a stillness not of silence but of peace, a heartwarming promise that their songs would carry on, lifted by those who listened, a legacy of courage and kindness that would echo far beyond the cliffs of Willow Creek.